Welcome back to Philosophy Unpacked. Today we're delving into a really powerful section from Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra, called On the Backworldsmen.
That's a fascinating title. Before we dive in, can you clarify for our listeners what exactly Nietzsche means by a backworldsman?
Absolutely. A backworldsman is anyone who believes in a world beyond this one, an afterlife, a heaven, or any kind of reality that is seen as more real or more important than our life here on Earth.
So, he's talking about people who are focused on a spiritual realm or a future paradise rather than the physical world we live in right now. That makes sense.
Exactly. And what's so interesting is that Zarathustra, Nietzsche's protagonist, starts by admitting that he himself used to be one of these backworldsmen.
Oh, so he's not just criticizing others, he's speaking from his own past experience, which makes the critique much more personal and compelling.
Precisely. He explains that he once saw the world as the work of a suffering and tortured God, something created as a kind of distraction for its divine creator.
That's a heavy concept. The idea that creation isn't a perfect act, but more like a coping mechanism for a God who is deeply dissatisfied and in pain.
Yes, he describes it as a dream or a colored vapor before the eyes of this God. Everything we experience, good, evil, joy, sorrow, was just part of this divine illusion.
So, in this view, the purpose of creating the world was for the creator to look away from his own suffering and essentially forget himself for a while.
That's the core of his past belief. Creation was an intoxicating joy for a suffering creator, a way to achieve self-forgetting. The world is an imperfect image of an eternal contradiction.
It's a very poetic, but also a very bleak way of looking at existence. It frames our reality as a byproduct of divine misery. But then he changes his mind, right? Wow! So he's saying we invented God, that this divine being wasn't from the beyond at all, but came from within ourselves.
That's exactly it. He says this phantom God came from his own ashes and glow. It was a projection of his own human ego, and more specifically, his own suffering.
So we created a suffering God in our own image because we ourselves were suffering. That's a powerful psychological insight into the origins of religion.
It is, and this realization is tied to his own personal transformation. He says, I surpassed myself, the suffering one. I carried mine own ashes to the mountain. And once he did that, he says, the phantom, the God he had created, simply withdrew from him. He no longer needed that external projection to cope with his suffering.
That's a fascinating idea. When you heal yourself internally, the external crutches you once relied on for comfort are no longer necessary. They just fall away.
Now, as a convalescent, someone who is recovering, he says it would be torment and humiliation for him to believe in such phantoms again. He has a new message for the backworldsmen.
And what is that message? What does he now believe is the true source of these backworlds or afterlives that people invent?
He argues that it was suffering and impotence that created all backworlds. It's born from a deep weariness with life, a desire to escape it all with a single death leap.
So the idea of heaven isn't born from spiritual truth, but from a profound exhaustion and a desperation to escape the hardships of this physical life.
Yes, and he gets very specific about it. He says, believe me, my brethren, it was the body which despaired of the body. The desire for another world comes from a rejection of our physical selves.
The body despaired of the body. What does he mean by that? Is he saying it's a physical, almost biological rejection of our own existence on Earth?
That's a great way to put it. He says the body, in its despair, groped with the fingers of the infatuated spirit at the ultimate walls, trying to break through to an other world.
It's a very visceral image, not just a philosophical idea, but a physical feeling of being trapped and wanting to escape your own skin and this very Earth.
But he then dismisses this other world as a celestial naught, a big nothing. It's a dehumanized, inhuman concept. He says existence doesn't speak to humanity except as humanity.
So we can't actually know anything beyond our human experience.
Any attempt to imagine a beyond is just a reflection of our own human thoughts and feelings anyway.
Exactly. This leads him to what he believes is the most honest and upright thing in existence, the ego, or the self, this creating, willing, valuing I.
The ego? That's interesting, because the ego is often seen as something to be overcome in many spiritual traditions, but Nietzsche is putting it front and center.
He is. He says this ego, our self, speaks most honestly of its own being, and crucially, even when it's dreaming of spiritual things, it still implieth the body.
So you can't actually separate the mind or spirit from the body. All our thoughts, even the most abstract ones, are ultimately rooted in our physical, bodily existence.
And the more the ego learns, the more it finds value and honor in the body and the earth. This is the foundation for the new pride that Zarathustra wants to teach.
A new pride? What does that involve? It sounds like a complete reversal of the BACKWORLDSMEN mentality.
It is. He says we should no longer thrust one's head into the sand of celestial things, but instead carry it freely, a terrestrial head, which giveth meaning to the earth. Alongside this new pride, he teaches a new will to choose and approve of the path humanity has followed, not to slink away from it like the sick and perishing.
So, this is a call for a radical affirmation of life, with all its flaws and struggles, rather than wishing for an escape. He's saying we should fully embrace our human journey.
Yes, and he identifies the sick and perishing as the very ones who despise the body and the earth, and who invented the heavenly world in the first place. He points out the irony that even these heavenly paths and bloody droughts they invented to escape were concepts they borrowed from the sensations of their own bodies and this earth.
That's a sharp point. They're ungrateful because they use the very body and earth they despise as the source material for their fantasies of escape. The rapturous feeling of transport comes from the body.
But here's a crucial nuance. Zarathustra isn't angry with them. He is gentle with the sickly and understands their need for consolation. He doesn't hold their ingratitude against them.
So it's not pure condemnation. He shows a degree of compassion, hoping they can recover and become overcomers, creating higher bodies for themselves.
Exactly. He even understands a recovering person who looks back tenderly on their old delusions, like someone visiting the grave of their dead god, but he notes that sickness still remains in their tears.
That's a very empathetic view. It acknowledges that moving on from deeply held beliefs is a difficult, painful process, and it's okay to mourn what you've lost, even if it was a delusion.
He does, however, offer a sharp critique of those who demand belief and claim that doubt is a sin. He says he knows these godlike ones all too well.
He's talking about religious authorities, the ones who enforce dogma. What does he say he knows about them?
He claims that what they really believe in is not some backworld or redeeming blood drops, but in the body. Specifically, their own body is their thing in itself.
So he's saying that even the most devout preachers are, at their core, motivated by their own physical existence. But you said earlier he sees them as sickly.
Yes, that's the paradox. Their own body is a sickly thing to them, something they'd gladly get out of their skin from. That's why they listen to preachers of death and preach about backworlds.
So their preaching of an afterlife is a direct result of their own uncomfortable relationship with their own bodies. They project their own self-rejection onto their theology.
It's a profound psychological diagnosis. They're trapped in a sickly body they can't escape, so they invent and preach a world where the body is irrelevant.
It really paints a picture of a cycle of suffering, where people who are unwell in their own bodies perpetuate ideas that devalue the body and the earth for everyone else.
And this brings us to Zarathustra's final, powerful message to his listeners. He tells them to ignore those preachers of death and listen to a different voice.
And what voice is that? What should they be listening to instead of the BACKWORLDSMEN and the sickly preachers? The voice of the healthy body. So the ultimate source of truth and meaning isn't a holy book or a divine revelation, but our own healthy physical being.
That's the final takeaway. He concludes that the healthy body, perfect and square-built, speaks more honestly and purely, and it speaks of the meaning of the earth.
So to recap this entire journey, Zarathustra moves from believing in a suffering God to realizing that God is a human projection of our own suffering.
Correct. He then identifies that this projection comes from a sickly body that despairs of the earth and calls for a new pride in our terrestrial, physical existence.
And his final message is that true wisdom and meaning are found not by looking to another world, but by listening to a healthy body and embracing our life here on earth.
You've summarized it perfectly. It's a radical call to reevaluate where we find meaning, shifting the focus from the celestial and imaginary to the physical and the real.
It's a philosophy that really challenges you to live more fully in the present moment, to find the sacred in the profane, and to honor the vessel that carries you through life.
And to create your own meaning, rather than inheriting it from traditions born of weariness and despair. It's a message of empowerment, grounded in the very earth beneath our feet.
This has been incredibly insightful. Nietzsche's ideas through Zarathustra really force you to confront basic assumptions about life, death, and meaning. Thank you for unpacking it for us.
It was my pleasure. It's a dense text, but the core message about affirming life and the body is one that remains incredibly powerful and relevant to this day.